Chapter 3 Devouring Mouths. Now set the sun, and twilight dimmed the ways, when drawing down his bark into the deep, he gave her all her furniture, oars, arms, and tackle such as well-built galleys bear, then moored her in the bottom of the bay. Homer. When Bert came down to breakfast the next morning, he found only his twin sister, Beth. She was waiting for him. "Dad's already gone to the office," she explained. "And Mother and Mary aren't up yet. I'm glad, because I want to talk to you. Mother and Sis are going shopping later for automobiles. Sis wants a new car. Then they're going to get some new gowns. Dad says we're heading for bankruptcy. Isn't that silly, when he's the president of a big company? Anyhow, that's what he says. 'You women are going to make us all paupers before you know it,' he says." Beth laughed prettily at the absurd notion. Bert finished his bowl of cereal thoughtfully. Bankruptcy. Such things could happen, he knew, for more than one classmate had packed up his things in the middle of a semester and left school when a telegram came to tell of shattered fortunes at home. But the Nushagak Salmon Company? Well, the thing would bear investigating anyhow. He would have a talk with his father. Surely President Lindsay would consider his son old enough now to talk to him as man to man. Beth was still chattering. "Bert, you're not listening," she protested. "And I have something important to tell you." She lowered her voice and leaned forward. "I had an adventure. But don't tell Mother and Dad." Some schoolgirl fracas, no doubt. Bert listened with half an ear, still absorbed in his own thoughts. "It's spring vacation now, you know," his sister was saying, "and I've been going down to the docks to watch them loading the Queen of Asia." Instantly, Bert was interested. "The Queen of Asia? Alone? Does Dad know that you've been going down to the waterfront alone?" "Of course not, silly. But it's heaps more fun than going on stupid house parties. Day before yesterday, Monday, I'd been watching the loading, Pier 50, you know, and was just starting home when it happened." "What happened?" "When my adventure happened that I'm trying to tell you about if you'll give me a chance. I'd driven out on the pier, and it's against the rules. Of course it's against the rules, but I did it. I watched the loading for a while, and then walked into the warehouse. Over at one side, there was a sailor or longshoreman guarding a pile of blanket rolls and boxes and luggage. He looked around in a sneaky way to see if anybody was looking. Guess he thought I didn't count. And then he reached into a 5-gallon can that had coffee labels on it and took out a cigarette. He put the cover back carefully and sat down to smoke. I thought it was funny that a coffee can should be full of cigarettes, and that man should be so mysterious about it. So I waited till his back was turned, and got one." Bert had forgotten to eat. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Not so fast, Mr. Bert. You've got to listen to the whole story, or I won't tell you another word," his sister threatened. "Well, I was looking at the cigarette. It was just a crude one, twisted at the ends, when I saw the man coming toward me. So I scooted out to the car as fast as I could go. I'd got the engine started and had just begun to back out toward the Embarcadero when—" "Where was the cigarette?" "When the man jumped on the left-hand running board and grabbed my hands. He got the funny cigarette out of my left hand, though it was crumpled and broken, and gave the wheel a quick twist to the right. Of course, that turned the rear of my car toward the edge of the pier, and there wasn't even a timber along the edge to keep me from going over. I was never so scared in my life. I jumped on the brakes. You don't need to look so bleached. I didn't go over. But when I stopped, the right rear wheel was almost half over the edge. The man let go and ran." "Sweet patootie," Bert breathed. "Didn't you report it to the police?" "Police? Do you think I wanted to see headlines, 'Daughter of a society woman attacked by ruffian'? I haven't told anyone but you, and you promised not to tell." "I promised no such thing. But I'll agree not to tell if you'll promise not to go to the waterfront alone again." "All right, Smarty, but you'll have to go with me now then, because that's where I'm going. Come along." Not at all loath to see again the huge 4-masted bark on which he hoped soon to be a sailor, Bert followed his twin sister. Half an hour later, they parked the car 50 feet from the spot where the Queen of Asia's long steel bowsprit pointed across the Embarcadero and upward towards the city's highest hills. Together, they strolled out on the pier beneath the bark's towering masts and yards and settled themselves on a pile of lumber to watch the sweating longshoremen at work. Already the bark was low in the water. Aft, only 2 feet of her red bottom paint showed, and forward perhaps a foot more. on top of 1,000 tons of coal taken aboard before the vessel was towed over from the Oakland estuary, were vast quantities of building materials, boxed shooks, tin, and other cannery supplies. The afterhold was filled except for a small space just under the hatch, which was to be used at the last for trimming the vessel. In another day, the forward hold would be filled too, and then would come a deck load, a tremendous cargo, nearly 5,000 tons, his father had told him. According to the books, she'll be wet in rough weather, Bert remarked. But how she will be able to carry sail with all that cargo to keep her steady. And to himself he added, maybe if she's steady, it won't be so hard to work aloft. Wouldn't Beth be green with envy if she knew that I was going to be a sailor? Bert's eyes roved aloft through the maze of rigging. How unbelievably high those masts were. And when the bark rolled, they would sway dizzily. What if he lost his nerve? What if he lost his hold? He remembered the story of Macefield's dauber and his awful plunge to his death on the unyielding deck. He shuddered. He might die that way too. For a moment he wished that he were going to remain safely on solid land, but immediately he was ashamed of his fears. If he were afraid now, sitting on the pier, what would he be when he had to go aloft? He laughed sheepishly, then remembered Beth and glanced at her hastily to see if she were watching him. Should he tell her now that he was to be a sailor on a square-rigged sailing ship, this very ship? But his sister seemed oblivious to his presence, fascinated by the slingloads of cargo that swung in quick succession from the pier to drop out of sight through the bark's hatch. The shore ends of the fore and main yards had been swung towards each other to serve as loading booms, and from their ends swung the steel blocks and cables of the loading gear. Muscular arms pushed great loads of box lumber from the warehouse to the edge of the pier on flat three-wheeled trucks. As one load sailed up and over the side of the vessel, another load came to take its place on the pier. In seemingly endless succession they came, and always, after hanging poised over the gaping hatch for an instant, the loads dropped like plummets into the hold. Time after time, a man who stood on deck by the hatch waved his hand gently to left and to right, in signal to the donkey man, and the hanging loads moved in response. Then the hand dropped, and with it the load, till the hand froze in a horizontal position, palm down for a split second before it motioned slowly downward. An instant later, the hand flicked upwards. The donkey engine raced, and out of the hold shot the empty cargo sling. Doesn't it make you think of a ravenous monster, devouring and always hungry for more? Beth breathed. Huh, said Bert. It makes me think of longshoremen loading a ship. But secretly he felt that Beth had pictured the scene far better than he could have done. After all, that yawning hatch was like a great hungry mouth, and in a few days other mouths on the ship would devour hundreds of men, black men, brown men, yellow men, to spew them forth when the ship reached the North Country to do the menial labor about the cannery. Already a score of black men and brown tatterdemalions lounged about the deck. A devouring monster, that's what the vessel was. But it was a beautiful, majestic monster, too, a splendid thing of steel and rope and canvas. Presently there was a pause in the even rhythm of the loading, the end of the box lumber. Half a dozen men emerged from the wide warehouse doors, pushing on a truck a heavy, complex piece of machinery. An iron chink, said Bert. A what? His sister inquired. An iron chink, a machine for cleaning salmon. The Chinamen did it by hand till somebody invented that machine. Slowly, for they required careful handling, 3 iron chinks and a dozen other pieces of machinery swung through the air and into the Queen of Asia's hold, to be stowed on top of the box lumber. Suddenly, Bert became aware that someone was standing close to them. He looked up to see a well-dressed man, apparently, to judge by appearances, a prosperous businessman, standing within arm's length of him, watching the loading. The man met Bert's glance and smiled affably. Interesting process, isn't it? He said. I've seen hundreds of ships loaded, but I never tire of watching another one take on cargo. Bert answered politely but briefly. He didn't like the idea of talking to strangers when his sister was with him. But Beth smiled brightly. Oh, I love it, she said. If I were a man, I would be a longshoreman, or a ship's captain, or... The man laughed. Bert did not like that laugh. It was unreal, a laugh with the mouth only, while the eyes told another story, and the mouth was a hard line, even when it laughed, and the eyes went half shut whenever the man spoke, as though he were afraid that his hearers would read his eyes instead of listening to his words. Bert shifted uneasily. He wished that the fellow would clear out, but instead of clearing out, the man sat down on the lumber pile next to his sister and chatted amiably. She was a fine packet, the Queen of Asia, he said. Never a smart sailor, but very able, especially in heavy weather. What do you mean, she was a fine packet? Bert demanded. Why, just that. The man's mouth laughed again, and his eyes squinted nearly shut. She was a fine vessel, and she would be again if she were completely refitted. However, I have no right to say so, since I am a member of a rival company. A rival company? Bert echoed the words and was instantly sorry for it. He was just encouraging the fellow to talk. Yes, I am J. Roscoe Zwissig, Vice President of the Bristol Bay and Chignik Fisheries Corporation. And aren't you two Albert Lindsay and Miss Elizabeth Lindsay? Ah, I thought that I could not be mistaken. Delighted to meet you both. I have the pleasure of knowing your sister, Mary, very well. Zwissig bowed to Beth and held out his hand to Bert. Bert shook it stiffly, wishing that the man would back off the pier. The noon whistles broke the tension. Why, it's noon, Bert, and I'm famished, Beth cried. Let's go to a waterfront joint and get some clam chowder. Zwissig bowed them farewell. As they climbed into Beth's roadster, she said, I wouldn't trust that man, J. Roscoe Zwissig. He has sneaking eyes. Just what I was thinking, said Bert. I couldn't place him at first, Beth went on, but as soon as he told us his name, I remembered. He's the man who's been forcing his attentions on Mary, and she loathes him. There's something queer about that man, Bert. The boy nodded. By the way, Beth, he said, can you describe the man who tried to spill you off the pier? The man with the mysterious cigarettes? Not very well. She hesitated. He was big and strong, and, oh yes, I noticed his face as he grabbed my hands. It was badly pock-marked. As the car rolled down the Embarcadero, past pier after pier, where the ships of many strange foreign cities lay loading and discharging, Bert had plenty to think about. A pock-marked face.